This tool here is called a table saw. This is a miniature version of a table saw. The one that you'll use will probably have a table that goes much further down so you can work with large material without needing a second stand or another person to hold it for you. So when you're using this, there's a few things that you need to set up before you make your cut. The first thing is the blade itself. So we want to adjust the blade to match the depth of the material. So if I wanted to cut this piece of wood here, you can see that the blade comes a significant amount above the material. So we actually want to change that. So you'll have a function to raise and lower your blade, and I'm just lowering it here a little bit so that the blade just peaks up above the material. That's all you'll need to cut through it. The next thing you want to do is make sure you have your cut mapped out. So on your material, let's say I wanted to cut it right about there. So now you want to get your fence adjusted. So you know where to put your fence because it'll line your piece of material up with the blade. So I want this to be cut here. I line it up right about there. And then you make sure you got that clamp down. So if I were to be cutting this, I would now turn on my machine and get it ready here. And I would get my push stick out and I would guide it through not with my hand but with my push stick because you want to keep your hands away from the blade. If I were to be cutting a larger material, for example, a big sheet of Lexan, for example, I would want to have another person helping me. So there would be one person guiding it through on this side, and they would have their push stick ready for when they get close up. And then on the other side, there's someone ready to hold it, support it, and take it away when you're done making the cut, just to make the whole thing smooth and safe. With a lot of these bigger tools in the shop, you're going to have a stop button on them. So the one that I use has a square about this big. It's red, it says stop on it, and it makes it really easy to turn it off after you're done using it. Another thing to be aware of in a shop is the emergency power button. So you'll have red buttons everywhere to shut off the power to the entire shop, and those are to be used only in situations, as the name suggests, of emergency. So this tool here is called the drill press, and it has that name because it has a drill, and you use it by turning the knob and pressing it. So a few safety things about this. The first thing is with the blade itself. You tighten and loosen it with this. This is called a chuck key, and you stick it in one of these holes here, and you turn it. You follow the lefty-loosey, righty-tighty rule to get the blade in and out. Now, after you've tightened it, you want to make sure you take the chuck key out of the machine, because if you leave it in, it will, this part will spin, and this will come flying out at you. Not good. So when you're actually going to use the tool, you want to make sure that you have your cut aligned, so you're not trying to panic and move your piece in the last minute. So bring the blade down and just touch the tip to see is it lined up where you want it to go. If it is, you're good to go, and return it back up, turn the tool on, and then you can go to actually make your cut. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses because parts can easily come flying out at you. And in all, this is a fairly safe machine to use. But don't let your guard down around anything. Keep focused on what you're doing. Another tool to be aware of is the bandsaw. And bandsaws, while they're running smoothly and correctly, sound pretty docile. But as the name suggests, they do have a band in them, which is a saw. So it's just a giant loop of a saw. And if that blade binds, it will snap. and that will make a giant noise. And generally the blade is actually contained in the mechanism itself, but it will be very, very loud. It will sound like something just exploded in front of you. So when you're using those tools, when you're using the bandsaw, make sure you move your board or piece of metal through it slowly and take your turns very, very gently. No sharp turns on a bandsaw. The biggest safety thing to be aware of is just keeping your fingers away from the blade area. So you can use a push stick to do that, which you may have some yellow or orange ones, just a plastic stick, or you might just use scrap wood to push your piece through the last few inches. Next up, we have the miter saw. And the miter saw is basically the opposite of the bandsaw, in that it is very noisy. It makes quite the ruckus when you're using it. So a few safety things to note about it. It's got some instructions on it. Don't cut your fingers off. Now that is fantastic advice, actually. Another thing, you can lock the blade down. It'll probably have something that you can flick at the back that'll lock it in place. So I don't have to hold it and it stays in a safe down position. One thing I want to mention about this one in particular is that it is missing something very important. These should have a guard on them at all times, and this piece will come down around the blade pretty much all the way. And you don't have to move it, you don't have to release it at all. Once you turn the blade on and you go down, it'll automatically lift up when you get close to your material. And you can cut, and then you lift it up and it comes right back. So that makes these things very safe to use. One thing I want to mention with them is that you can cut at different angles. So make sure you have that setting correct, and make sure you know where you're going to cut before you make the cut. So you can make your mark on your piece, and when you're using them, especially the newer ones, will have this feature where when you start making the cut, a laser will come down and mark on your material exactly where it's going to make the cut. So you can make sure it's lined up before you make. And that is pretty much it for the miter saw. It's a pretty safe tool to use.